All right, for those, I hope that there's no one here who isn't familiar with Governor Johnson and what he's doing, his campaign and his history, and the sort of inspiration which he's provided a lot of us with. I think it's very important that we have more than just one leader. Ron Paul, of course, has been our leader for a while, but having another spokesman out there like Gary Johnson, who's pushing a pro-liberty message, a very high profile, highly desirable. Governor Johnson is the former governor of New Mexico. He is an outspoken advocate for fiscal conservatism, for responsible government, for lower taxes, for ending the war on drugs, for protection of civil liberties, for rebuilding and revitalizing our economy on free market principles, promoting entrepreneurship, privatization. As governor of New Mexico, he had a phenomenal record. In 1976, after he had his own company called Big J Enterprises, grew to a multi-million-dollar corporation. He then decided to go into public service. In 1994, he was elected governor of New Mexico. With very little experience in politics, but with experience in business that gave him legitimacy in running a company, running a business, running a state. There's not that much different. And he was able to do more to bring spending under control in New Mexico than virtually any other governor. He vetoed more bills than all the other governors in the country put together. Over 700 bills? He cut the rate of growth of his government in half, privatized half the state prisons, shifted state Medicaid to managed care programs, and ultimately, he left office as one of the most successful governors our country has ever had, leaving behind a legacy of government in New Mexico, which, despite the less stellar records of his successors, remains considerably better governed because of his legacy and his example than most any state in the country is today. And on that, I'd like to bring up here to talk about his presidential campaign and everything else.
Dave said it. I've been an entrepreneur my entire life. I mean, since I've been 13 years old, I was the one throwing newspapers and going door to door asking for lawn jobs and whatever. But in 1974, I started a one-man handyman business, working since I'd been 17 years old in construction. I've paid for everything that I've had in my life since I've been 17. But in 1974, I started a one-man handyman business, me, and in 1994, actually had 1,000 employees, electrical, mechanical, plumbing, pipe fitting. American dream come true, show up on time, do what you say you'll do for people, do a little bit more than what you say you'll do for people, and that was the reason that the business grew. I sold the business in 1999. No one lost their job, and go figure, they're doing better than ever right now. I view my venture into politics as entrepreneurial. I went and I introduced myself to the Republican Party a couple of weeks before I announced, and they embraced me. Really, they embraced me. Wow, you sound great, you look great, we love what you have to say, we love you. We're going to make you part of a very inclusive process. We're an inclusive party. We want all sorts of different voices in the process. It'll be good for the process. But you just need to know that you will never get elected. But it is not possible to come from completely outside of politics and get elected governor in a state that's 2-to-1 Democrat. Well, how did that happen? I'd like to think it was based on what I had to say, which was I was going to run state government like a business. Best product, best service, lowest price. It was going to be issues first. It was going to be politics last. Everything was going to be a cost-benefit analysis. What are we spending our money on, and what are we getting for the money that we're spending? So I got elected. I take office, and what I find myself doing is really saying no to a whole lot of legislation. The first year I was in office, I think the legislature passed 400 bills, and I vetoed 200 of those bills. And just saying no. I said, I vetoed 750 pieces of legislation. I had thousands of line-item vetoes while I was governor of New Mexico. I took line-item veto to an entire new art form. No, just saying no doesn't fly. It doesn't fly anywhere. You got to have reasons for the no. And so the no's, why I vetoed this legislation. Look, I don't think we need to grow government. I don't think government is the solution to this problem. This problem is real, but I don't think government is going to provide a solution for this problem, and I don't think that spending this amount of money is going to make any difference in anyone's life in New Mexico. And I took that debate on, and I took that debate on for every single one of these bills that I vetoed. I wrote a veto message for every single veto that I wrote. And that got played out in the newspapers, that got played out on the radio, that got played out on television every single day. What has Johnson vetoed today? And I'd like to think that since I got re-elected the second time by a bigger margin than I got elected the first time, I would like to think in a state that was 2-to-1 Democrat, that just speaks volumes to the fact that people really do appreciate good stewardship of tax dollars. And in those vetoes, in those 750 vetoes, a third of the legislature was Republican. A third of those vetoes that I rendered were Republican bills. Because Republicans grew government just like Democrats. Only Republicans did it in a good way. They did it in a good way that was going to temporarily raise costs of government, but ultimately lead into less cost. You know what? I never bought into that. I just vetoed the legislation. And then 100 of those bills I vetoed were where the vote in the legislature was 117-0. And I vetoed the legislation, and it held up. Only 2 of my vetoes were overridden. So it ended up making a difference when it came to really billions of dollars worth of new spending. And I would argue really made a difference in the lives of citizens of New Mexico, because not one single tax went up over that period of time. And I'd like to think that I vetoed all of that regulation legislation that would have just burdened business. Reduced taxes. I always said not significantly at all, but the significance was that taxes didn't go up. Over an 8-year period while I was governor, there was 1,200 fewer state employees over an 8-year period. That had never happened before. And I always said that was a testament to state government employees, doing more with less. There was something else besides saying no to all this legislation that I got known for nationally, and that was my advocacy for school choice. I really believe that to improve education in this country, that we should bring competition to public education. And the only way to do that, in my estimation, is to create a voucher system. So for 6 straight years, I proposed every single student in New Mexico would get a voucher that would have brought about competition to public education. I really believe in free markets. I really believe that if you unleashed educational entrepreneurs onto our educational system, that there would be dramatic improvements in education. And to even try and predict what those improvements would be wrong on our part. We fixed ourselves with the whole notion that schools are bricks and mortar. Who's to say there would be bricks and mortar at all? They would be the computer, they would be interacting between teachers and parents and students over the computer. And they're doing that right now in Utah. But in New Mexico, my legislation didn't pass, surprise. But in New Mexico, public opinion went from 35% of New Mexicans supporting school vouchers to over 52% of New Mexicans supporting school vouchers when I left office. And then another thing that I got known for nationally, in starting my second term, I was keeping with a promise to analyze everything that state government was doing. What are we spending and what are we getting for the money that we're spending? I really wanted to take a hard look at the war on drugs in New Mexico, and I wanted to include legalization as a potential alternative. Now, in looking at this issue, I came at this from I wanted to crack down on drinking and driving. Drink and drive, I don't want those people on the road. So I go to the police, I go to law enforcement. We need more resources. I go to the courts. We need more resources. The prisons are full. So it turns out that half of what we spend on law enforcement, the courts, and the prisons is drug related. And to what end? We're arresting 1.8 million people a year in this country on drug-related crime. I always point out that's the population of New Mexico that gets arrested every single year in this country. And we now have 2.3 million people behind bars, the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. So looking at this issue for a fairly short amount of time, I came to the conclusion that 90% of the drug problem is prohibition-related, not use-related. And that's not to discount the problems with use and abuse, but that ought to be the focus. So I advocated then, and I advocate now, legalize marijuana. Control it, regulate it, tax it. It's never going to be legal to smoke pot, become impaired, get behind the wheel of a car, or do harm to others. And it is never going to be legal for kids to smoke pot or buy pot. And when it comes to kids, in which situation is it easier for kids to smoke and buy pot? The situation that exists today, where you can buy pot virtually anywhere, and by the way, the person that sells pot also sells harder drugs, or a situation like a 7-Eleven or a Walmart, or a liquor store, where you have to go in and actually produce an ID to buy a controlled substance, having produced an ID. I think you could make the case that it would be harder to do if it were under a controlled environment. And then when it comes to all the other drugs, I advocate harm reduction strategies. The things that we really care about. Reducing death, disease, crime, corruption. In a nutshell, it's looking at the drug problem first as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue. I got out of office January 1 of 2003. I was term limited. I'm a firm believer in term limits. I think as a result of term limits, I think politicians do good things for you and I, as opposed to whatever it takes to get reelected. I didn't want to have a say in what was happening in national politics. I didn't want to have a say in what was happening in state politics, because really I had my shot and I thought that I really made the most out of that shot. But I find myself just outraged over the fact that we are bankrupt in this country. I have lived my entire life watching government spend more money than what it takes in. And from the moment that I became conscious of what government did, which was to spend more money than what it takes in, from the moment I realized that, I have always thought that this is not sustainable and that this is fundamental to government. How can it spend more money than what it takes in? And that at some point there would be a day of reckoning. I just think that the day of reckoning is here and it's now. And I was asked a week ago on national television, what about repealing President Obama's health care plan? Yes, I think that we should repeal President Obama's health care plan. But how about if Republicans, to gain a little bit of credibility in this argument, how about if they offer up a repeal of the prescription health care benefit that they passed when they controlled